Hello everyone, and welcome to the special edition marking the second anniversary of the war in Ukraine. We are here in the suburbs of Kiev, which was heavily bombed by the Russian army in the first few hours of the invasion. Several 100,000 buildings are estimated to have been destroyed. It is estimated that over $410 billion in reconstruction aid is needed. The European Union has been a key partner throughout the war, providing over €85 billion in aid, both civilian and military. It must be said that in the first year of the war, the country faced the biggest recession in its history, with the economy falling by almost 30%. This year, Ukraine's GDP is expected to rebound, but Ukraine remains fragile. Its food and grain exports are limited. The economic repercussions of the war are obvious for the country, and are also obvious within the European Union itself, which has used several instruments, including the Cohesion Fund. Sophie Samai explains. In
the absence of cheap Russian gas and goods, energy, food and transport prices have skyrocketed across the European Union. After hovering around 10% in November 2022, the EU's annual inflation rate fell to 3.1% by the end of 2023. In order to give Europeans some hope and purchasing power, the European Commission has proposed drawing up to €40 billion from its cohesion funds. Member states are thus entitled to use up to 10% of the funds allocated to them by cohesion policy at national level to help the poorest families and small businesses in difficulty. In 2023, for example, the Île-de-France region used €45 million from its ESF Plus fund to finance its energy boost, a €250 check to help 160,000 households pay their electricity bills. In Romania, federal funds help renovate a hospital, which reduced its energy bills by between 30 and 40%. In addition to inflation, other economic consequences are causing concern as the European Union has decided to open accession negotiations with Ukraine. According to a recent study, Ukraine would receive €13.2 billion in European funds per year if it joined, or €11.4 billion net additional to the local budget once contributions are deducted. Most of this would come from the Common Agricultural Policy and Cohesion Policy. Some are already imagining problems of unfair competition with this large agricultural country. Premature fears because enlargement to a country at war that meets strict criteria is not going to happen anytime soon. And to start this program, here we are in Bucha. Bucha, a martyred city, a symbolic city, a city taken by Russian forces on February 27, 2022. A city where the war has reached a new level of inhumanity and reached the level of despicable with the macabre discovery of these false communes, of these hundreds of Ukrainian bodies abandoned when the Russians left. Bucha, a martyred city, a city that the United States and the European Union have decided to support by allowing it to rebuild. We are from Sverwant. We left on March 16, a few days before the bombing began on the city. We left with practically nothing, just what we had put in the car. My daughters are young and $500,000. They told me, let's find money so that someone can help us bounce back. We applied for a grant for essential items to rebuild a bakery, a refrigerator, fermentation chambers, an oven, and the grant was granted very quickly. Everything went well. Everything went well. To talk about this reconstruction, we are with Irina Ubere. You are Ukrainian and you are in charge of projects at the European representation in Ukraine. For 2 years, the European Union has been involved in supporting and rebuilding in Ukraine. What do we do when reconstruction is happening at the same time as fighting in the east of the country? And to support victories on the battlefield, but also victories on the economic front, which are just as important. The Ukrainian authorities believe that we should not wait for the end of the war because we cannot predict how long it will last. But the reconstruction and recovery of the country must begin now. In concrete terms, how do we do it? We set up the grant program for small and medium-sized enterprises because many of them have lost a lot of assets, like this small business that is hosting us today. They have lost everything. So these small injections of liquidity were really necessary, very urgent, mainly to keep businesses alive. What makes this project emblematic? It is a good example of what the European Union is doing on the ground in Ukraine. This bakery is one of the 300 winners of our European Business Support Program. So basically, in 3 months, we have mobilized the implementation mechanism for them to support those who have suffered the most and who have moved and had to start from scratch. Alberto Fernandez good morning.
Good morning. You are in charge of economic and trade issues at the European representation in Ukraine. The Union's support, as we have just seen, is quite multifaceted.
Ukraine is a country that needs funds to continue operating, especially now during the war. The current budgets that were presented and approved provide for approximately €80 billion in expenditure, and tax revenues barely reach 40%, or half. So supporting the economy so that it continues to generate tax revenue and activate all the country's entrepreneurial fabric is very important.
Beyond supporting and defending European values, why is supporting the Ukrainian economy important at this time for the European Union?
It is important because Ukraine is now a country that is sending accession countries to the European Union. We have already worked with Ukraine to ensure that all sectors linked to the European Union's internal market are aligned in Ukraine. One of the consequences of this is that bilateral trade between Ukraine and the European Union has increased from 25 billion in 2015 to over 50 billion in 2022. And this despite the war. And we help Ukraine, not just by supporting companies to adapt to these changes in the legislative framework, but also by helping governments and authorities to operate and implement all the reforms that are necessary to have an environment similar to that of a country like France or Germany. Would you dare to talk about a win-win strategy in the end? I think it is indeed a win-win in the sense that we will benefit from the competitive products that Ukraine produces. Ukraine is not just about cereals and steel, it is also about creativity. They have enormous potential, and Ukraine will also benefit because they will have access to the European market and will also be able to have equally competitive goods that are produced in other European countries. Well, this is the logic of traditional trade, and we intervene where necessary to facilitate this exchange.
2 years of war have caused a massive influx of Ukrainian refugees into border countries. More than 4 million Ukrainians have benefited from the temporary protection mechanism, which has allowed them, among other things, to work within the European Union. Among these host countries is Poland, of course, neighboring Poland, which has welcomed more than 1.5 million of them. The Union has also intervened with the K program, a cohesion fund to help refugees in Europe, with aid worth more than €13 billion. However, at the same time, some members of the Union fear that cheap Ukrainian labor will harm the European Union's labor market. From fear of the Polish plumber to fear of the Ukrainian worker or truck driver, it's only a small step. Luke Brown tells us more. In the heart of a strategic corridor between Belarus and the Russian enclave of Sinningrad, Suwałki in Poland has stepped up its solidarity with the 1,500 or so Ukrainians who have come to seek refuge there. Katerina and her family were the first to arrive 2 years ago. Even today, for example, a few weeks ago, people came from Ukraine and I saw in their eyes the same feelings that we felt. That's why we are here and trying to help, because we have experienced it ourselves. We understand how difficult it is. Katerina now works for an EU-funded NGO. She plans to return to her country once the war is over. But her son Arsen sees his future in Poland rather than in Ukraine. I think the level of education is higher than in Ukraine, that's for sure. And I already speak a little Polish. So it will be easier to continue my studies than to go somewhere else or return to Ukraine. Here, €50,000 from the European Cohesion Funds for cross-border regions has been released to finance language courses and counseling to help refugees find jobs. They are doctors, psychologists, managers, lawyers. That's what they are. Of course, they are also workers. But to integrate them into our country, we simply need a better understanding of the language so that this barrier does not become stronger but becomes more equal. Poland still hosts nearly 1.5 million Ukrainian refugees, but this support has shown its limits in some areas. In February, Polish farmers protested against the import of cheap Ukrainian grain. And this winter, Polish truck drivers blocked the Ukrainian border. The wages paid to non-European drivers have been lifted, but the wait at customs is still long. Our economy is sinking further because of this war. Things like this put a spanner in the works. These trucks have enabled Ukraine to export 60 million tons of food and beverages. A solidarity corridor that has replaced the always dangerous Black Sea shipping. Igor has been a truck driver for 30 years and earns a maximum of €500 per month. Even in good times, when there are no strikes, we barely make ends meet. If we were in the European Union, I would be paid accordingly, but I'm not in the European Union. Stanisław runs a trucking company in Poland. Since neighboring Belarus was subjected to sanctions, he has halved his truck fleet. For him, his Ukrainian drivers constitute unfair competition. This is not possible because it is a country that is not aligned with European Union standards and does not meet the same requirements as us. We will probably lose our jobs. We are bearing the costs of this war because we are giving our jobs to Ukrainian companies. They take over our markets, they come in and we find ourselves without jobs. 10 years ago, Western European entrepreneurs were frowned upon by the arrival of Polish plumbers on their market. Today, it is the fear of social dumping by Ukrainian truck drivers that is causing concern in Poland. Back in Ukraine, we are a few kilometers from Bucha-Borodyanka, which paid a heavy price, a very heavy price, in this war. The material toll speaks for itself, with the destruction of more than 1,600 buildings. That is to say, the task, the scale of the reconstruction in this area. And if there is someone who is monitoring this reconstruction, it is Mrs. Ludmilian Bumister. Hello, Umilian Bister.
Hello. So, you have been a member of parliament since the first hours of the Russian withdrawal, and it was necessary to rebuild. So, we rebuilt the homes, the buildings, the houses, the homes. Now, we are in the second phase, which is the reconstruction of infrastructure. The reconstruction of homes began almost the same day that the Russian soldiers left this territory. And now, the second phase of reconstruction of administrative buildings and civilian infrastructure actually gives a lot of hope to the people who live here in Borodyanka and in other cities.
We are talking about this new administrative center built thanks to the European Union and the United Nations program. That's it, that's
it. There is the reconstruction of buildings. There is also the reconstruction of public services like this one. It is important. This administrative service center is the center that prepares all the documents for people, for those whose documents were destroyed during the war, during the hostilities. And, like everywhere in the Kyiv region, there are many more people from the east or south of the country who have come here. So really, the administrative centers and local authorities in these regions now play a key role in truly establishing normal life in these regions and cities. Among the reforms requested by the European Union, there was the reform of administrations. There was also the fight against corruption and laws against oligarchs. Where are we at in this regard? The fight against corruption is not a demand of the European Union, it is a demand of Ukrainian interests. Some of these laws, by the way, you did not vote for them. That earned you your label, You are no longer part of the presidential party. I refuse to vote for the law against the oligarchs because, apart from no, there were no things in it that we are talking about and working on now. Lobbying, the Anti-Monopoly Committee. To change the system, we need to create a system that will truly have the power to stop violations of the law.
President Zelensky has confirmed this. There will be no presidential or legislative elections, contrary to what was planned. Do you understand these voices that are being heard here and there saying that perhaps we are dealing with an authoritarian drift? I don't believe that Ukraine can ever be in an authoritarian state, because it goes against the Ukrainian soul. I agree with our president that elections during wartime, first of all, there are technical complications. But even without that, from a security perspective, elections are always an increase in hybrid warfare in the country, and we have to hold our ground. We can't engage in elections now.
Thank you, Lumila Bister, for your frankness and your outspokenness. Thank you to the team that helped prepare this program. Thank you, viewers, for your loyalty. More information on France 24 right away. Oh,